Hello friends, how are you? My name is Arif Herger and today I'm going to talk a bit about worshipping in pre-Christian Scandinavia. I just want to give you a quick notion that things were not exactly as they are today in terms of religion, obviously, or in terms of Northern European traditional paganism. In our modern reconstructions of Nordic paganism, there is a lot more focus in the same dozen gods, the usual celebrations throughout the year, and a great mixture of other religious realities outside Scandinavia, to give some sort of consistency to our modern neo-pagan paths of Old Norse religion. And because of foreigner religious concepts brought into Nordic paganism, there is the tendency nowadays to believe our Norse ancestors worshipped the same gods we do today. And everyone was in some sort of religious unification, everyone subscribed to the same religion and gods, which isn't true, of course. Sometimes people tell me with great certainty that Old Norse peoples did not worship Loki and other such deities, for instance, which also isn't true. Old Norse faiths were pagan in nature, and if within such faiths a variety of beings are included, you can be certain that someone worshipped them, or at least certain entities are the remnants of ancient pagan cults and worshipping. Nordic paganism isn't dualistic in nature, so divine entities and other beings aren't placed in the myths and folklore just to fill a role to reinforce the eternal fight between good and evil. And because of that, we have to be opened to the possibility that people worshipped gods such as Loki, Angrboda, Jormungandr, Hel, etc. Deities who are often put aside in our modern religious reconstructions of Nordic paganism. Just because we put these gods aside nowadays doesn't mean our ancestors did it. And in the case of Loki, for instance, it's no coincidence he comes in the myths as often as Odin himself, and Loki continued to be called upon for magical purposes even after the Viking period in Icelandic magical incantations, as an example. But of course, today I'm not going to talk about the worshipping of these deities. All this to tell you that just because nowadays neo-pagans within modern Nordic paganism decided to worship just a handful of gods and always the same gods, doesn't mean in the past it was like that. Not everyone worshipped the same, even if they were introduced in the same cultural reality. So let's take a look at some examples, and I hope you enjoy this video. As I have said, in pre-Christian Scandinavia, people did not subscribe to the same religious reality. Old Norse religion isn't the name of a specific religion, but a broad sense that covers a vast tradition of various religious realities of a culture. You cannot put Old Norse religion into a big book and say, this is the religion and this is what you have to follow. Old Norse paganism is an extensive religious phenomenon with multiple spiritual concepts. We have to take in mind that in pre-Christian Scandinavia, the pagan religious concepts of the time existed in a variety of geographical realities, some of which had little contact with each other. You had the general gods of the Norse pantheon, worshipped in urban centers. Then you had small villages with their own local deities and celebrations. And then you had ritual performances made by the priesthood, made by wanderers, sorcerers, witches, rune casters, a variety of people inside and outside society. Many variants of the same culture coexisted in some spaces. but there were types of religious beliefs solely of a specific area, region, city, village, etc. Some small communities adopted certain aspects of the general great tradition, and on the other hand, great urban centers where the general religious tradition was performed also adopted certain concepts of various locations they came in contact with. Exchange of religious beliefs and introducing them into the general religious tradition, forcing it to constantly evolve, constant shifting movements of cultural elements. In pre-Christian Scandinavia, religious beliefs were not stagnated, but constantly flowed. In pre-Christian Scandinavia, much of the religious ceremonies were led and performed to a certain extent by the nobility. It wasn't uncommon to see members of the nobility within the priesthood sphere. People from outside nobility, physically and socially speaking, outside the reality of the nobility, were permitted to attend some of the ritual performances and celebrations. People from different social realities gathered at central places for worship, in sanctuaries, for judicial assemblies, markets, etc. So in certain occasions, a lot of people from different backgrounds shared the religious phenomenon, meaning that they were aware of certain religious beliefs and shared them with each other, shared certain concepts in public gatherings. These places served to spread religious beliefs and created certain religious points where people had in common. But then there were other realities outside these centers of public gathering. The reality of a locality, a region, a county, a certain town, village, even the reality of the farm and other spaces scattered all over the Scandinavian geographical reality, until we reach very remote spaces where people lived and had their own beliefs aside from the main ones they came in contact with and adopted when they traveled to attend public gatherings. A couple of festivities attracted people. For instance, in Sweden, many Swedes would flock to attend the cult and market at Uppsala. So these places, cults and festivities were quite significant for entire regions. However, these gatherings occurred sporadically. Most festivals were actually celebrated within local communities and within individual farms, very restricted celebrations. Only certain fixed annual festivities linked to the changing of the seasons, for instance, were attended by the majority of the population. But a great portion of festivities and cults were done either in private or just strictly within a community. And that created other religious beliefs solely shared by the community or by a particular farming community and family, creating religious beliefs outside the general traditional religious beliefs. Let's see a couple of examples. Sigvaltre Thordarson was a skald who visited a village named Hof in Sweden. To every farm he went, he was denied entrance and no hospitality was given to him. Everyone turned him away because they were, all of them, celebrating Hoffablot, a sacrifice to the elves. Not as in beautiful elven beings of the forest, but a category of beings ranging from land spirits to ancestors. Sigvaltre was extremely annoyed by the entire situation because he was not familiar with the celebration of the Hoffablot. He was a Nordic, but not everyone celebrated Hoffablot. He certainly never had. It was a celebration strictly held within private domains and in certain regions. Another example in Olaf's Helga tells us how the Christian king Olafr in late autumn visited a farm in a very remote area in northern Norway, where he found people celebrating a pagan feast related to fertility. The details of the festivity have no equivalents in other sources. No other pagan celebration of Scandinavia matches this one. This festivity was focused on Volsi, personified by the severed penis of a stallion. How many of you heard about this deity named Volsi? Raise your hand. I don't blame those who never heard of it before, because this might have been just a local deity for that specific area. Certainly, this festivity was local, or at the very least, a regional celebration, with no other equivalents, a unique pagan celebration within the Old Norse religious reality, not shared by the majority of the Scandinavian population. This is exactly what I have expressed in the beginning of this video. Certain gods appear in mythology, and we should not put aside the possibility that some of those deities received worship at a certain point, or at least might have been local gods later on introduced in the main frame of Old Norse beliefs, eventually brought into the general worshipping. Of course, a lot of polytheistic religions include a lot of deities that belong exclusively to the mythology and never receive worship, at least not in a broad religious reality. They might indeed have been gods of specific communities. Just think about the fact of a specific community worshipping certain gods, and to bring that community into the fold, their gods are included in the general pantheon to attract these people into joining with larger communities for a variety of reasons. The Romans did that. They included to their own pantheon the gods of the people they wanted to aggregate to the empire. Why shouldn't Scandinavians do the same? Maybe the mythological war between the Aesir and the Vanir tribe of gods is an account of actual Scandinavian communities aggregating each other's gods in an attempt to pacifically unite. Also, take the case of the god Odin, who has more than 100 names. Most of these names might have been of local deities that were incorporated into the cult of Odin when it was introduced in Scandinavia. The local gods lived on in the figure of Odin, and this cult served to unite people into one single worship. Take the case of Frøya. She was also called Vardol, Hörn, Gefn, Sir, Trungra and Skjold. It's possible that some of these names originally denoted local and regional goddesses, and for infinite reasons were later identified with Frøya. Christians did exactly the same, turning pagan gods into saints to facilitate the conversion. The pagan gods lived on as saints within the new religion. It wasn't just the gods that were incorporated, of course, but also many festivities. I mean, in certain Swedish regions, so many local gods and local people were turned into saints to facilitate the conversion that at a certain point the locals were frustrated with the church because there were so many saints that it just created a hollow meaning to all of it. There was nothing special about saints anymore because virtually everyone was turned into a saint. What I'm saying is that throughout history, it was a common political process to incorporate the gods of the people a certain political power wanted to make an alliance with. So, throughout Scandinavia, almost everyone shared common beliefs that were expressed in annual festivities or public gatherings and celebrations. But the great majority of the festivities and celebrations were local and regional, and many people worshipped other gods and had their own festivities, worshipping, celebrations, and even cults, aside from the general tradition. Not everyone worshipped the same. There were certain common religious beliefs that linked people to a general cultural tradition, but many religious beliefs were unique and were either later on incorporated into the general cultural tradition or never were and remained local phenomenon and eventually disappeared, and we are left with just the names of certain gods and no more than that. So we cannot say with absolute certainty that certain gods were not worshipped. Most likely they were, at least in a certain location, in a certain period in history. Some gods disappeared and others remained, and we are left with just a couple of tales or the names only. It's also possible that certain cults of local deities might have spread over larger areas and in some cases might have been incorporated into the general pantheon of gods. And we are only talking about gods. Let's not forget that there were the cases of local spirits and other religious beliefs beyond the divine sphere, certain cults and magical performances not to the gods, but to forces of nature, local spiritual entities, ancestors. We have cases of people and communities in PreChristian Scandinavia that did not worship a specific deity, but were focused on keeping alive certain traditions to elements of nature, giving offerings to and performing rituals around waterfalls, rocks, megalithic monuments, trees, clearly not specific deities, but other traditions that survived in certain communities, completely outside the pantheon of Norse deities or any other pantheon. Again, not everybody worshipped the same. Alright, my dear friends, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, as always. See you on the next video, and tack för idag.